I never thought a sleeping pill could kill an entire marriage. For 18 years, every night my wife said, "Take it, it'll help you sleep." And I obediently did, believing it was love. But tonight, I pretended to swallow, then kept the pill under my tongue. A few minutes later, the back door clicked, the porch light flicked on, and a man's silhouette stepped into my house with her key. I heard a small laugh, glasses clink, and whispers that hurt to the bone. In the dark, I trembled not from fear, but from clarity. For 18 years, she didn't put me to sleep so I could rest. She did it so I'd never see the truth. Tonight, I woke up in the middle of my own life, and when the kitchen door opened again, I was ready to let her know. I'm the one who's awake, and the truth is about to be exposed right here in my own home. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Langston Reed, 60 years old, a carpenter who retired early, living in Asheville, North Carolina, a gentle small town nestled in the Blue Ridge. I once thought my life was settled. A small wooden house I built with my own hands, a gentle wife, and lazy afternoons on the porch, listening to birds and sipping a cold beer. After 40 years of labor, I believed I'd found peace. I didn't realize the peace I spoke of was just a long sleep someone else created with pills. My life was so regular it was mechanical. At 8 p.m., we had dinner together. Dana always cooked well. Sometimes barbecue she knew I liked. Sometimes a red bean stew she said was good for the heart. At 9 p.m., she set a small white pill in a glass of water in front of me and gently said, "Take it. You need to rest." I never asked much. I always thought that was her way of caring, of loving me after so many years together. At 10 p.m., the bedroom light went off, and I dropped into deep sleep like someone flipped a switch. I used to be proud of having a thoughtful wife. Dana handled everything from bills, doctor, appointments, even oil changes. She'd say, "You've worked your whole life. Let me handle the rest." I agreed, grateful, telling myself I was lucky. In my younger years, I was quiet and principled. I worked with my hands and believed kindness would be repaid in kind. Maybe that was my first mistake. Thinking care automatically meant love. As the years passed, routine became a cage. I no longer stayed up late to read the news. I can't even remember the last time I was fully awake after 10 p.m. Sometimes I'd wake in the night and vaguely hear a door open, soft footsteps, but I reassured myself. She's tidying up or checking a window. She said I snored loudly and needed to read in the living room so she wouldn't be bothered. I believed her. I believed so much that I didn't notice that in the very house I built, I'd become a sleeping tenant. There were small, strange signs that were easy to overlook. One morning, I smelled men's cologne in the bathroom, the strong, sharp kind I never wear. I asked. She laughed. "Oh, probably from the grocery store. I tried a sample bottle." Another time, the shirt I'd worn the day before was folded neatly as if it had never been worn. I thought my memory was slipping, and when you live long enough in a loop, you start doubting your own senses and stop trusting what you see. Everything changed one June afternoon. I was sweeping the yard when Mr. Brown, my next-door neighbor, joked, "Mr. Reed, your place has been lively lately. Every night there's a strange car parked by the back gate. Friends visiting?" I forced a smile. You must have seen wrong. But his comment followed me all evening. I paid closer attention. Dana was still gentle, still cooked, still smiled, still handed me the pill every night. Nothing seemed different, but now I heard even the smallest sounds, the spoon touching the glass, her breathing as she waited for me to take the pill. I suddenly realized she never took one. With me, never swallowed any pill at all. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 18 years. I pretended to take the pill. When she turned away, I tucked it under my tongue, keeping my mouth closed so she'd believe I'd swallowed. She smiled, turned off the light, and said the familiar line, "Sleep well." The door closed. I lay still, listening to the clock tick in the dark. Then soft steps touched the floor. The back door opened a sound so small only someone awake would hear. Then a car engine started. The porch light flashed once and went out. I sat up, heart pounding. My hands shook, not from fear, but because the truth was taking shape and I didn't know what I was about to face. About 10 minutes later, I heard the door open again. Strange footsteps, heavy, sure. A deep male voice chuckled, "I missed you." I froze. Her laugh blended with the clink of glasses, then silence. In that instant, I understood. For 18 years, I hadn't been resting. I'd been lulled to sleep. I didn't jump up. I just leaned over, grabbed my phone, and turned on the recorder. I wanted everything saved, proof I wasn't crazy, that my silent instincts had been right all along. I heard them talking in the kitchen, her voice soft and intimate. "You have to leave early. Langston wakes up early." The man laughed. "Keep giving him pills for a few more years and he probably won't even remember his own name." My blood turned cold. Every word cut into my memory. Every pill I'd thanked her for her care was the chain she used to keep me in the dark. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe a century. When she saw him out, the back door clicked again. I put the phone down, turned off the recorder, and lay back where I was. I didn't want her to know I was awake. I wanted her to fall into her own trap. The next morning, she was the same as always. Brought me coffee, asked, "Did you sleep well?" and smiled sweetly. I said, "Very well, thank you." Inside, I knew I had just begun a silent war. When she left the house, I opened the cabinet to find the pill bottle. The sharp chemical smell hit me. The label had my name on it and the dosage was higher than a typical prescription. I searched online and found it causes deep sleep and temporary memory loss with long-term use. I trembled, not from fear but from realizing that for 18 years I hadn't been living, I'd been sleeping in place of the truth. That night, I set my phone on the table and turned on auto record. When she handed me the pill, I still smiled. I took it, faked the swallow like the night before. She relaxed, kissed my forehead, and said, "I love you." I answered softly, "I love you too." But inside, I was ready for what was coming. When the back door clicked again, I simply smiled in the dark, because tonight she wasn't the only one acting. I was, too. And in that quiet wooden house in the Carolina mountains, a 60-year-old man woke up after 18 years of being lulled to sleep, ready to face the darkness he once called love. Looking back now, it feels strange. Things didn't start with a lie. In the early years of our marriage, that small white pill really did make me feel better. I remember the first night Dana gave it to me. She smiled kindly and placed it in my palm like a small gift. "You've worked all day. You need to rest," she said. "The doctor says this one helps you sleep deeply and isn't addictive." I didn't ask more. I took it, then slept straight through till morning. That sleep was calm like a glassy lake, no dreams, no tossing. I thought it was a little everyday miracle. I used to wake early and see her making breakfast, sunlight on her brown hair. She'd ask if I slept well, and I'd say, "Very well. You're so thoughtful." Every time. She smiled, her eyes lighting with a kind of relief, almost like victory. When I traveled to Tennessee for work, she carefully packed the pills in a small plastic box, labeling each day. "Remember to take them on time," she reminded me. "If you forget, you'll feel exhausted tomorrow." She said it many times, like a ritual. I took them, doing as I was told, like a dutiful husband. I never thought to check what was in them. To me, it was a sign of trust, of love. I once told coworkers, "With someone taking care of me this well, I'll live to 100." Everyone laughed, said I was lucky. I laughed along, not realizing I was describing the very chain around my life. Back then, Dana ran everything. She said I didn't need to worry about bills, utilities, or insurance. You just work. I'll handle the rest. Her voice was so gentle it made me feel guilty if I refused. I thought it was sharing the load, the discipline of a model marriage. Looking back now, it was how she slowly took every bit of control from me so gently, so reasonably. I even thanked her for it. I started losing the habits that made me who I was. I used to read the paper at night or listen to old jazz. She said, "The sound makes it hard for you to sleep. Let me read to you." Not long after, she stopped reading too. I stopped turning on the light, stopped playing music, stopped staying awake. All that remained was one habit: take the pill, then sleep. I don't remember exactly when we stopped talking at night, maybe year 3, maybe year 5. Every conversation ended with a smile and a white pill. She didn't argue, didn't get angry, didn't raise her voice. That quiet made me believe I had a gentle wife. Now I understand silence was the perfect lid over her secret. Once, I asked, "Can't you sleep? I often see you reading in the living room." She smiled and touched my shoulder. "You snore too loudly. I can't sleep. I'll read a bit and sleep later." I nodded, believed her instantly, even felt guilty. I didn't know that the snoring she mentioned was a way to leave my bed and step into another world. Gradually, I stopped recognizing how I lived in that house. Everything was too calm, too perfect. Every morning, coffee was ready on the table, the paper open to my favorite page. I thought that was delicate love. Now I see it was a steel schedule, a system designed so I'd have no chance to question anything. Many times when I got home earlier than expected, Dana's eyes flickered with a tiny startle, just for a split second. Then she smiled like nothing had happened. I remember one rainy day when I got off work early. When I opened the door, she was in the kitchen, speaking softly to someone on the phone. Hearing me, she hung up immediately. "I was calling my sister in Florida," she said, voice even and calm. I believed her immediately. I always believed her, because I was the type who thought suspicion was an insult. Maybe I believed too much, so when that trust began to crack, I blamed myself. I told myself, "You're being paranoid, you're tired, must be age." I didn't realize the only thing tired in me was a soul kept asleep for too long. Strange sounds, the soft slam of a cabinet, a latch clicking, shoes on wooden floor became hallucinations in my mind. I still remember a night around 2 a.m. when I heard the back door open. The hinge squeaked. I tried to sit up, but my head was heavy and my body felt glued to the mattress. The next morning, when I mentioned it, she just laughed. "You were dreaming. You took your pill. How could you be awake?" And I believed her again. I believed because believing is easier than doubting. Believing lets you keep sleeping, and I slept not just in bed but through my life. For those 18 years, each day of mine was a perfect copy of the day before. Coffee at 7 o'clock, a walk at 8 o'clock, the wood shop at 9 o'clock, dinner at 8 p.m., pill at 9 p.m., lights out at 10 p.m. Not a single deviation. I thought that was order, discipline. In truth, it was a repeated cycle of control, with the key in the hand of the person I called wife. Once, my friend Carl joked, "Langston, do you ever argue with your wife?" I laughed. "Never. We have nothing to argue about." Carl raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you afraid that's boring?" I answered, "Peace isn't boring. Now I understand. A marriage without arguments isn't necessarily happy. It might be that only one person gets to speak and the other is only allowed to sleep." The more I think back, the more I shudder. Tiny details from the last 18 years have pieced together into a horrifying picture. Everything she did was calculated to make me believe in that perfection. I lived by a schedule, but not my own. It was Dana's clock. She controlled every minute of my life, from sleep to thought. I used to think love meant unconditional trust. Turns out, love without awareness is just volunteering yourself to be manipulated. I trusted so much I lost the habit of asking questions. I turned myself into a pleasant, obedient, unproblematic man, the very kind a liar wants nearby. Every night when she placed the pill in my palm, I felt like a child receiving a reward. I didn't realize that in that moment she was giving me permission to temporarily disappear so she could live another life behind my back. And the bitterest part? I was once proud of it. I used to brag to friends. Dana keeps my life steady down to the second. Yes, steady. Steady like a cold handcuff, light enough that you don't notice, but the longer it stays, the tighter it gets. Now, looking back, I understand. Love without awareness is just a prolonged sleep. I trusted so much I made myself a willing prisoner. And every pill, every "I just want you healthy" was another link in that steel schedule, solid, cold, and as silent as her smile. I lived, I breathed, I worked, but I wasn't truly awake. Only that night, the night the porch light flashed, the night I didn't swallow the pill, did I realize those peaceful days weren't happiness. They were velvet-wrapped chains, and I wore them for 18 years without knowing it. The first real sleepless night, I lay still, breathing evenly, pretending to sleep. The living room clock counted seconds longer than any night I'd ever known. Dim light from the hall slipped through the door crack, splitting the room in two. On one side, the husband lying still. On the other, the secret about to step out. I heard her stir, her breathing slow and light, as if counting my heartbeat. Then she leaned over and placed her hand on my chest, a light touch, just enough to check if I was truly asleep. I kept my breathing steady and let my heart beat naturally. After a moment, she pulled her hand back and sat up. The wooden floor creaked softly. The bathroom light flicked on for a second, then went out. Next came soft steps toward the back door. Click. The sound was so small that if I had truly been asleep, I'd never have heard it. But I was awake, and every sound that night etched itself like cuts in wood. I heard the key turn in the lock, then the door open. A cold draft rushed in, carrying night air and a faint smell of exhaust. Soft heels tapped the porch, then a car engine started. I sat up, staring at the porch light flickering outside the window. It flashed once and went dark. The house sank back into thick black. 18 years. How many nights like that had I slept through, not knowing? I sat still for a long time. My mind was empty, repeating one thought. Where is she going? As the engine noise faded, I got up and walked around the room. Everything felt familiar yet strange, like I was walking through someone else's house. I looked at our wedding photo on the table, me and Dana under a maple in the fall. I let out a small laugh. The embrace in that photo died a long time ago. I was the last to admit it. A little over an hour later, I heard the car return. This time, it wasn't a lazy rumble. It was firm, choppy braking, familiar and sure. The back door opened, then closed. Footsteps on the floor, a fabric bag set on the table. The faucet turned on lightly. I got back into bed, pulled up the blanket, and kept my breathing normal. When she walked into the room, the smell hit me. Not her perfume, the gentle lavender I smell every night, but men's cologne, sharp, heavy, and cloying. That scent wasn't mine. I didn't need a mirror to know. She climbed into bed beside me, her breathing quicker than usual. I stayed silent. The strange scent filled the air, wrapping my throat and making me nauseous. I turned my head slightly and spoke very softly, almost under my breath. "Did you switch to a new lotion?" She froze for a second, then answered evenly, "Yeah, I bought a new one. It's a bit strong, isn't it?" I smiled. "It's fine, you'll get used to it." She believed me. I knew she did from how her voice relaxed. Soon her breathing evened out, while I lay there with eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling and thinking, How could I ever sleep again? The next morning, everything was the same. She made coffee and poured my first cup. The smile was at the exact angle and rhythm, no more, no less. I looked at her a bit longer, and she grew slightly uneasy and asked, "What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" "I just think," I said. "Your new scent really suits you." She smiled, a little smug, and turned away. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter burn on my tongue, though I couldn't tell if it was the coffee or her lie. I started noticing everything. She usually left the bedroom about 10 minutes after I fell asleep. She took a light jacket, flats, and her phone. She always came back before 5 a.m., showered immediately, and washed hand towels and bed linens more often than usual. One morning, I ran into Mr. Brown on the porch. He leaned on his hoe and looked up. "Hey, Langston, every night I see a black car parked by your back gate. It's been months. I thought your son was visiting." I smiled, keeping my voice even. "No, must be someone who took a wrong turn." He shrugged and said nothing more, but his words stayed with me all day. A black car. For months. Thinking of that, my blood seemed to ice over. I remembered the nights I slept like a rock, the soft door sounds, the strange scent, even the emptiness I woke up with every morning. It all came together into one simple, brutal truth. This didn't start last night. It had been going on for a very long time. I decided not to confront her. No questions, no anger. A man who works wood like me knows if you want to undo a tight joint, you don't use a hammer. You use a small knife, go slow, and cut along the grain. I went online and ordered a small camera with infrared, the kind hidden in a clock. I also ordered a mini voice recorder, about the size of a finger. 2 days later, the packages arrived. I quietly mounted the camera in the kitchen cabinet corner where it could see the back door and the dining table. I put the recorder under the pillow, set to turn on automatically at 9:30 p.m., right before she handed me my pill. That night, when she gave me the pill, I swallowed like always. She smiled. "Sleep well." But I knew she had no idea that the man sleeping was the most awake I'd ever been in my life. I lay still, heard her go out, heard the door softly close. Not long after, the car engine sounded again. I checked the clock, 10:27 p.m. I memorized that number, like a carpenter marking a cut line on wood. Every night after that, I repeated the sequence: pill, pretend, listen, record. And every night it was the same. The lock, the car, a small laugh, sometimes the sound of a man's heels tapping on the porch. Dana had no idea I had switched roles in her play. She still thought I slept, still said, "I love you" to a husband who no longer believed. I told no one and didn't complain. I just documented. Times, sounds, scents, every small detail. I learned to use silence as a tool. Before, my silence was surrender. Now, it was the sharpest weapon I had. People say the truth hurts, but I think waiting for the truth hurts more. I didn't want to react impulsively. I wanted her to expose herself, so she'd understand I was no longer the man lulled to sleep. One night, I sat in the garage wiping my old chisels. The soft scrape of metal was clear. I remembered Dana's eyes whenever I came home early by accident, that quick flinch, as fast as a lock being snapped shut. Now I understood it all. Catching someone in the act doesn't require violence, just evidence. I didn't need to scare her. I just needed her to see she had misjudged this man. From that night on, every move she made was something I saved, a piece in the picture of betrayal I was assembling, one piece at a time, night after night. And in that quiet house, with the sound of insects and the smell of old wood, I knew I was on the right path. For the first time in 18 years, I was no longer the one lulled to sleep. I was the one quietly waking up. The next night, Dana did everything exactly by the schedule she'd kept for 18 years, a script crafted too perfectly to show a seam. She cleared the table, poured me a warm glass of water, and set a white pill in my palm like always. "Take it," she said, voice soft as mist. I smiled and swallowed the fake pill, just a vitamin I had swapped in earlier. She suspected nothing. The bedroom light went out, and the house dropped into the manufactured stillness I used to call peace. She lay down, waited a moment, then turned slightly. The same old move, her hand on my chest, checking my breathing. I kept my breath steady, eyes half closed, body still as a log. She pulled her hand back, sat up, and her bare feet touched the floor with a sound so faint no one asleep would ever hear it. I listened to her slippers slide down the hall, the cabinet door ease open. A dim light from the living room slipped through the crack, a thin blade cutting the dark. The back door latch turned once, then a soft click, the kind of sound that, to me now, was louder than any confession. I waited 30 seconds, then slowly sat up, every movement measured by breath. I set my feet on the wood floor, avoided the squeaky spot, and edged toward the door. My heart beat slow but strong. I opened the door just enough to see the warm kitchen light stretching in a long strip across the floor. I moved to the corner where I could see the kitchen without being seen. And then I saw the scene that the pill had kept me from seeing for 18 years. She was laughing, a strange laugh, not the gentle smile meant for a husband, but the look of a woman living truth in a wrong moment. Light reflected off her skin, her hair loose, a thin robe draped over her shoulders. In front of her stood a man leaning against the counter, confident, familiar. He poured 2 glasses of wine and said in a deep, rough voice, "I told you, I'm going crazy missing you." She laughed, clinked her glass with his, and that light ring was louder to me than any explosion in my life. I recognized the chair he leaned on that used to be my spot, where I read the paper every Sunday morning. His jacket was tossed over the back, and the cologne I'd smelled before drifted through the kitchen. I stood in the hall, hands clenched so tight my knuckles went white. The anger in me didn't explode. It was quiet, cold, and deep as groundwater. He bent, set his hand on her waist, pulled her close. She didn't push him away. They laughed soft, but sharp enough to cut every nerve in my head. I stepped toward the kitchen door. The wood floor murmured under my feet, but they didn't hear it. I took a deep breath and shoved the door open. That sound thundered through the quiet like a crack of lightning from a clear sky. Both of them snapped around. She froze, lips parted with no sound coming out. He, the man who had walked into my home with my wife's key, stared wide-eyed, stammering without words. I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't throw anything. I just stood there in the doorway and looked at the 2 shaking people in front of me. For a few short seconds, the air was thick enough to choke on. The clock in the living room kept count. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he grabbed his jacket, bolted for the back door, nearly tripping over a chair. The door slammed hard, echoing through the little wooden house. Dana stayed frozen, hands trembling, face pale. She raised a hand to her mouth, tears starting but making no sound. I looked around the kitchen, clean, tidy, the place where we used to eat together. 2 glasses of wine on the table, red swirling like bloodstains on the wood. I walked to the table slowly. Every step felt like stomping on 18 years of memories. I looked at the bottle, the glasses, then at the thin robe on her. She opened her mouth. "Langston." Don't," I cut in. My voice was hoarse but strangely calm. "Don't lie anymore." She broke into tears and came closer, grabbing my hand. "I'm sorry. It's not what you think. I pulled my hand away. Not what I think? I've heard enough." I sat down in the chair he'd just leaned on. The pill bottle sat on the dining table, the label with my name on it in her handwriting. I picked it up and shook it. The pills rattled inside, dry as metal skimming metal. "We're done, Dana." I said it quietly, but each word landed like a hammer. I didn't yell. I just opened the door and stood there. To this day, I still wonder, was silence the better choice than anger? What about you? Would you choose silence or say it all at once? Write me a short line so this story can hold your point of view, too. She staggered back against the wall, eyes wide with fear. Maybe for the first time in 18 years, she saw me truly awake. I didn't smash anything. I didn't want her to think I'd lost control. I wanted her to see my silence wasn't weakness anymore. I set the bottle on the table. The cap popped off, and a few pills rolled onto the floor. The sound was tiny, but it cut through the dead-quiet kitchen. One round pill rolled slowly, spun, then stopped at her feet. She bent to pick it up, but her hands shook too much to hold it. I looked at her, not angry anymore, just empty. "You know," I said, "the man you fooled for 18 years, he's dead." She looked up, lips trembling. "Don't say that. I cut her off. That man believed love can fix everything. He believed his wife was good, kind, honest. Tonight he learned love isn't a pill, and a pill isn't love." I stood. She reached to touch my hand, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Touching me now doesn't mean anything." The warm light washed over her face, catching on the tears. But I didn't feel pain anymore. The feeling in me had gone out the moment the door flew open. I turned and walked to the living room. Each step pulled me away from my old life. She stood there sobbing harder, like if she cried loud enough time might turn back. But I knew nothing was going back. I sat at the table, pulled out my phone and played the recording. A man's laugh, her reply, glasses clinking. The sound in the empty room felt haunted. I didn't finish. I turned it off and set the phone down. I looked at the wall clock, the minute hand right on 12. A new day had just started, and my marriage had just ended. I took a small piece of paper and wrote a few lines. "No explanations, no apologies. From now on, I'll sleep for real, but not beside you." I set the note next to the pill bottle and walked to the window. Outside, the late-night moon threw silver light across the porch. A light breeze moved the curtain, bringing in the cold night air. I sat down and looked at the last pill lying still on the floor. White in the moonlight, small and ruthless. I didn't pick it up. I left it there as a witness to the death of a husband who once believed in unconditional love. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there until the first light of morning crept through the window, and in that silence, I knew. I had just buried the most naive version of myself. Morning rose quietly, like it was afraid to break the air in the house. Early light slipped through the thin curtain, crawled across the wood floor, and brushed over dried wine streaks, tiny glass shards, and the shadow of a woman bent over the stove. Dana cleaned in silence. Dishes clicked, water ran. Sometimes she sniffled, maybe crying, but those tears didn't look like remorse anymore. They looked like fear of losing a place she thought she'd always control. I sat in a chair, quietly watching through the window. The fields in the distance were pale, tree branches still wet with dew. Everything out there was intact, only inside me had turned to ash. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock hand moving minute by minute. 18 years together, so many mornings I slept deep in the drug haze, never knowing how false the world was that I woke to every day. Now, without that white powder in my blood, everything was bare and sharp enough to sting. I stood and opened the cabinet where she kept the pills. The sight made my throat clamp shut. Dozens of empty bottles piled together, labeled with my name, Langston Reed, and doctor signatures that were forged or copied. Each bottle was a year of being lulled to sleep, a night stolen from memory. I pulled out every prescription, every note. Some pages were yellowed, the ink smudged, but I could still read her familiar scrawl. "One pill nightly helps deeper sleep." I gripped one bottle. The plastic creaked. My anger didn't blow up. It spread, slow and hot like embers under cold ash. I understood she hadn't just cheated in body or feeling. She had poisoned my clarity for 18 years. Each pill didn't just take sleep, it took away my ability to recognize the truth. She turned me into a gentle, easy, foggy, obedient man, the ideal husband she needed to cover a double life. I pulled the old wooden box from under the table, the one where we kept little things of ours, the wedding photo, letters, the first birthday card she gave me that said, "Forever yours." I laid everything on the table. Morning light poured through the window and washed over those keepsakes, making them look like exhibits in a case. I looked at the wedding photo. Her smile back then was so real, and I was so sure. Now every keepsake felt like a small knife cutting into memory. 18 years I thought I was preserving happiness. Turns out I was preserving the scene of a performance that ran nearly 2 decades. I was just lonely. Her voice floated in, small as a breeze. I turned. Dana stood in the doorway, hands gripping her shirt, eyes red. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just felt empty. You worked all the time. You didn't pay attention to me like before. That sentence fell in the room light as a hair, heavy as lead. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, the look that used to be love, now a distance you can't bridge. She waited for me to speak, maybe hoping for forgiveness or a lifeline, but all she got was silence. I didn't need to yell. I knew my silence was the heaviest sentence for her now. I turned back to the table, carefully gathered the keepsakes, and put them back in the box. Each photo, each letter now only evidence. I labeled the lid, 18 years of lies. She stepped back, tears spilling, but said nothing else. I took out my phone and called. An old friend, Frank Turner, a retired attorney who grew up with me in South Asheville. We hadn't talked in years, but this morning I knew he was the one to call. Frank picked up after 3 rings. His voice was still rough, deep, and straight as ever. "Langston? Long time. What's going on?" I took a breath. I need advice, legal advice, and about ending something that isn't a marriage anymore. He was quiet a few seconds, then asked, plain, "She cheating?" "Worse," I said. "She drugged me with sleeping pills for 18 years, forged doctor orders, kept me foggy about everything." Silence on the line for a long moment. Finally, Frank spoke slowly. "Langston, listen to me. Don't just leave. Take it back." That line felt like a sober command. I sat still, feeling the weight of each word. Take it back not for money but for justice, for the years stolen in silence. After the call, I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. March 14th, 5:45 a.m. After 18 years, I woke up. Dana is crying, cleaning, as if water could wash away guilt. I found dozens of bottles, fake orders, forged signatures. I am no longer a victim. I am a witness. I wrote without stopping. Every detail, every door sound, every night I heard a car by the gate. I recorded the peaceful days, the full meals, the smiles she gave me after each pill. I wrote with the memory of a man shaken awake from the longest sleep of his life. The morning dragged. Sunlight hit the dining table where last night her laugh and that man's laugh still echoed. The smell of coffee from the old pot rose sharp and bitter. I looked around the place we used to call home. All I saw now was a crime scene. The kitchen gleamed, so tidy it felt fake. Every corner, every chair, every framed photo carried the mark of staging. I felt like I was standing on a set, not in a home. Dana still stood in the doorway, eyes swollen, and asked softly, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end this," I said, calm. "Not with violence, with the law." She bit her lip, eyes pleading. "You'll destroy me." I turned and looked straight at her. "You destroyed me first, Dana." She collapsed into a chair, sobbing, and I stepped onto the porch. Morning light hit hard, bright but honest. For the first time in years, I felt the sun on my skin without a sleeping pill fog over it. I took a long, slow breath, like getting reacquainted with my own body. Inside, there was no storm left, just a cold resolve. I knew I wasn't going to run. I'd run long enough. I walked back inside, picked up the notebook, and added one last line. The end won't come with tears. It will come with the truth. And as I closed the page, the morning light fell across a line of dry ash still on the kitchen table. Ash from last night, ash from a love burned all the way down. That morning, I understood. Everything had turned to ash, but from that cold pile I would start over by reason and by justice, not by heart. I never thought I'd see the day I had to leave the very house I built with my own hands, with years of steady work. But that morning, when the last strip of sunlight spilled across the porch, I knew it was time. I packed in silence. The old suitcase in the closet corner wore a thin layer of dust. I opened it, and the smell of old fabric mixed with wood made my chest tighten. A few neatly folded clothes, the old leather shoes I wore to work, some important papers, the deed, the marriage certificate, bank accounts, and a small hard drive holding all the recordings, photos, and evidence I had gathered. Each thing placed in the suitcase was a statement. I wasn't leaving to run away, but to start over with hands that still trembled, but a head that was clear. Dana stood in the doorway, hair tousled, eyes bloodshot. Crying, she said, "Langston, don't go. Please, talk to me. I'm sorry. We can fix this, just give me a chance." Her voice shook, caught as if squeezed between two hands. I only looked at her for a moment and gently shook my head. "We'll see each other again," I said, "but in court." She collapsed to the floor, hands covering her face, sobs breaking in short, jagged bursts. I didn't turn back. Every apology was now just a late echo in a house with no soul left. Stepping onto the porch, I felt the morning wind slip through my shirt, cold and real. That feeling, the one I had forgotten for 18 years, made me shiver. No drug haze in my blood, no fake scent in the air, only the smell of real life. The raw tang of wood, the damp of dew, and the metallic bite of iron on the old railing. I locked the door, the cylinder turning like a farewell. The house that once held laughter was now only the scene of a quiet crime. I stood for a few seconds, glanced through the window, and saw Dana slumped on the floor, head bowed. No anger, no tenderness, only emptiness. I picked up the suitcase and went down the steps, my hands shaking slightly. Not from weakness, but from learning how to take back ownership of myself. I drove along the winding road out of Asheville. The sun rose higher, light filtering through the roadside pines and laying gold bands across the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, the little house grew small, blurred, and vanished after a bend. 18 years shrunk into a single backward glance. About an hour later, I pulled into a cheap motel off the highway. The sign wobbled, some letters peeled by rain and wind. My room had a narrow bed, wrinkled sheets, peeling walls, and an air conditioner rattling like it might quit. But I felt at ease for the first time in nearly 2 decades. I was in a space that belonged only to me. I set the suitcase in the corner and opened the window. Wind drifted in, carrying the smell of asphalt, wet grass, and dust. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressed my hand to my forehead, and let out a long breath. My body started reacting to the lack of pills. My heart raced, my skin prickled, my head throbbed like a vice. Sweat beaded on my neck, though the air outside was cool. I lay down and tried to close my eyes, but my mind filled with thousands of backward-spooling scraps, her saying, "Take it," the back door, the car, the cologne, the small laugh in the kitchen. All 18 years curled into a warped film looping in my head. I clenched my teeth and told myself, "Don't be weak, you've slept enough." I snapped on the light, grabbed my notebook, and wrote. I wrote to keep my mind from drifting. March 15th, Highway Motel. No. 12. First night without pills. The body rebels, but the mind is clear as glass. Everything is painfully sharp. No fog, only light. I made a list. 1. Contact Frank, retired attorney. Ask him to guide me through a legal file. 2. Back up the data recordings, photos, prescriptions, journal. 3. File for drug testing, identify chemicals in each pill she gave me. 4. File for divorce and report medical forgery. Each line was another snip, cutting through the cord that had bound me for years. I opened my laptop and plugged in the hard drive. A long list of audio files appeared. I played one. A man's laugh first, low and confident. Then Dana's voice, soft and chilling. "Don't worry, he'll never know." That line tightened my throat, but I still listened through. Glasses touching, a quiet kiss, then silence. I shut the laptop, sat very still. Not because I was hurt, but because something in me had finally let go. Every sound was now final evidence. I no longer needed any explanations. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the last pill. She had forgotten to toss it this morning. I set it on the table. The yellow light made it shine like a tiny pearl. I stared at it for a long time. What had once stood for care now stood for control. Next to it, I scribbled a line in my notebook. Never let anyone else decide when you're allowed to sleep. That night, I turned off the light. The room fell into full darkness. No ticking clock, no slippers on the floor, no door opening. Just the steady thump of my heart. I lay there feeling my own breath, even real and mine. My body wrestled and craved the pill, but I didn't take it. I wanted the pain to exist, a reminder that I was living for real, awake for real. Each time my eyes drifted shut, I opened them and looked at the pill on the table. In the moonlight leaking through the window, it glowed like an eye staring back at me. I whispered, "Not one more time." Sometime after midnight, the headache eased. My body felt spent, but my mind was strangely calm. I lay on my side, watching the silver light trace the edge of the bed. No Dana, no laughter, no fake scent. Only me, bare, alone, but free. The first sleep in 18 years came slow, not gentle but real. No pill, no lie. It came with exhaustion and honesty. As I drifted off, I knew, from now on, nothing would put me to sleep again. Not sweet words, not a look, not any pill, because the man who woke up that night had sworn he would never be lulled again. 3 weeks after I left home, I walked into the office of Frank Turner, my old friend, now my private legal counsel. He was older, hair nearly all white, but his eyes were still bright and sharp as a blade. When I set the wooden box on his desk with every bottle, recording, photo, and prescription inside, he just looked at me for a few seconds and said, "Langston, I've done this work for 40 years. It's rare to see a case where one glance shows how thoroughly the truth has been poisoned." I didn't answer, only nodded. Frank opened each bottle, inspected labels, photographed them, took notes with care. He sampled a few recordings, laughter, clink of glasses, a door opening, and Dana's voice. No more words were needed. The evidence spoke. The divorce file was ready in 3 days. Frank urged me not just to file for dissolution, but to press for a criminal investigation into prolonged drugging, prescription forgery, and financial misappropriation. I agreed. Not to get even, but because if I stayed silent, the truth would be put back to sleep, like I had been. A week later, the Buncombe County Court accepted the case. A temporary order was issued: freeze all joint accounts, seal the house, and grant me temporary control of assets until a ruling. When I got the news, I only nodded. No glee, no triumph. Just a hollow that finally began to cool, like a cold wind passing over ashes. The first hearing was on a Monday morning with light rain. An old courthouse, red brick walls, stone floors worn by footsteps. I sat in the front row, hands still shaking a little. Not from fear, but because the weight of truth makes a person's hands heavy. Dana came in last. Gray dress, hair in a tight bun, dark rings under her eyes. She glanced at me, then looked down. The woman, laughing in my kitchen that night, was gone. Beside her sat a young attorney, tense, eyes darting. When the clerk called the case, the room fell silent. Only the scratch of pens, wooden chairs creaking, and the steady rain outside the windows. Frank began. He spoke slowly, clearly, with no venom and no heat. He let the evidence speak. Copies of prescriptions with a doctor's signature that didn't exist in the medical system. Audio of Dana saying, "Take it, you'll sleep better." A pharmacist's statement that she collected the pills for her husband for years, sometimes even switching the doctor's name. A neighbor's written account, Mr. Brown, confirming he often saw a strange car parked by the back gate at night. Each exhibit went up on the screen. I didn't look at Dana, but I felt her gaze shaking beside me. Her attorney offered a weak rebuttal. "My client suffers from depression. This behavior stems from illness, not intent to harm." Frank lifted an eyebrow. "If we call drugging a man for 18 years depression, we'll need to build a lot more asylums." A small murmur rose behind us. The judge tapped the gavel for order. Then I was called to testify. I stood, legs still a little unsteady, but my voice oddly calm. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here to tell what happened each night, each door sound, each scent I once thought was normal. I'm not asking for my youth back. I just want the record to show I slept for 18 years, not because I was tired, but because I was deceived." I told them about the first night I pretended to swallow the pill, about the door opening, the warm light in the kitchen, the laughter and the wine glasses. I didn't use harsh words. I spoke like I was reading a journal. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt. When I mentioned the last pill I set on the motel table, Dana broke down. Her attorney touched her shoulder, trying to steady her. She shook her head and choked. "I wasn't trying to kill you. I just didn't want you to leave me." The judge looked up. "And so you gave him sleeping pills for 18 years. She lowered her head and said nothing. The hearing ran 4 hours. The pharmacist took the stand, confirming all prescriptions were picked up by Dana and most had no valid medical indication. The doctor named on the labels was confirmed to have retired 10 years ago. Police presented lab results. The pills contained a mild neuroinhibitor that, with long-term use, impaired memory and cognition. I sat and listened without looking up. I didn't need to see her face. Each confirmation was enough. Frank closed with, "Your Honor, we're not asking for a heavy sentence. We're asking for the truth to be recognized publicly so, Mr. Langston Reed is no longer dismissed as paranoid or delusional. He was simply a husband who trusted his wife for too long." That afternoon, when the judge read the interim ruling, rain still traced the window panes. The gavel struck 3 times, echoing through the room. The court grants Mr. Langston Reed's petition for divorce. Mr. Reed retains full ownership of the house, joint assets, and savings. Regarding unauthorized use of controlled substances, the file will be forwarded to the Medical Investigative Authority for criminal proceedings. Dana collapsed onto the bench. She didn't look at me, only bowed her head as tears soaked her clenched hands. The young attorney beside her had nothing to say. I didn't speak either. I quietly looked at the window where the rain tapped the glass as if counting each lost year. The man who came to my house, the one who drank wine with her that night, vanished once the case went public. Police said he left the state, abandoning a small company drowning in debt. No one saw him again. I didn't care. He was just a faint detail in a finished picture. When the session ended, I stepped into the hall. Long wooden benches along the corridor still smelled of old varnish. I set a hand on the rail, cold and rough, like touching my own life, worn down but still standing. Frank walked beside me and murmured, "You won." I gave a small smile. "No one really wins in this, Frank," he sighed. "At least justice did its job." Yes, justice did its job. Inside me, There was only a strange quiet. No joy, no hatred, just the balance of right and wrong finally put back in place. I walked outside. The rain had stopped. The street gleamed with reflected light. I tilted my head to the gray sky and took a long breath. No pills, no lies, no night wine. Only the sound of my own footsteps in the courthouse hall, and the clear feeling that I was truly awake after 18 years of sleep. I returned to the old house under court order, exactly 3 weeks after the final hearing. The county sheriff came along to make sure the pickup stayed orderly. No one spoke on the way. When the car stopped at the gate, I sat a few more seconds, looking at the familiar house in the afternoon sun. Gray wooden siding, old shingles, geranium pots still swaying on the porch. From the outside, it was the same, only I was different. The door opened to a faint smell of old wood and disinfectant. Dana had removed most of her belongings per the order, leaving only what was mine. A few clothes, the woodworking toolbox, some books, the rocking chair we used to sit on together during summer evenings. I walked slowly, each step like wading through thick memories. The living room was bright, but the light wasn't warm anymore. Where the wedding photo once hung, a pale rectangle marked the wall. I touched it, the gritty paint was cold. The thick rug still held a faint stain from the wine that night. I shook my head, even the floor kept the memory of betrayal. I stepped into the kitchen. The room that had been the heart of the house, where baked goods once mixed with laughter, was now the graveyard of lies. On the table, a wilted vase of flowers, cloudy water, and scattered petals. I opened a drawer and found the old knife I once honed, the wooden spoon where I had carved L and D Langston and Dana. I smiled, not with regret but with the recognition that some things shouldn't be kept, even if they carry your name. I gathered the remaining personal items into boxes. The old mailbox, a few family photos, the small notebook where I logged measurements. Each thing passing through my hands felt like an old witness, recalling what I no longer wanted to remember. Every room, every object, every bright corner carried the smell of betrayal. When the sheriff asked quietly, "Need me to help with anything?" I just shook my head. "No, I only want to close this door myself." I went out to the porch and looked at the yard where the swing used to hang. One chain had snapped, and it drifted slowly in the wind. I saw myself there, a man once hanging between trust and breakage, between love and waking up. That afternoon, I sat on the steps and signed the sale papers. The young realtor handed me the contract and said, "This house should move fast, great location." "You're right," I said. "But for me, this isn't a home anymore." I signed, my handwriting slow and firm. Each stroke cut another binding thread. I bought a small apartment on the edge of town, an old 3-story building with no elevator but wide windows facing east. From there, I could watch the sun rise every morning. No yard, no porch, no footsteps but my own, and I liked it that way. Fewer comforts, more light. On day one, I brought only 2 boxes, a wooden chair I'd built, and my old teapot. I set the chair by the window, put the pot on a small table, then sat and watched the evening light slide through the glass and spill gold across the floor. The light touched my face, warm, real, and needing no one's permission. The first nights, I still couldn't sleep. My body had been on pills too long, and sometimes I lay awake until nearly morning. I didn't turn on the lamp. I cracked the window and let the night wind in. Street greenery, distant cars, a dog barking now and then, ordinary sounds I hadn't truly heard for 18 years. Now they were the music of freedom. Slowly, I slept again without pills. The first true sleep came after 3 white nights. Short, maybe 4 hours, but when I opened my eyes, my head felt light. No afterimages, no dizziness, no metallic aftertaste. Just a real morning, and me truly living. I started buying a few simple things. A new set of dishes, a small wooden cabinet, a water filter, a desk lamp. Nothing expensive, Nothing showy. Everything honest and tidy, like I was arranging my own spirit. Each morning, I rose early, brewed tea, opened the window, and sat in the wooden chair watching the sun lift over the far roofs. Steam curled from the cup, mingling with the first light, and the stillness was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I had never seen peace take such a clear shape. I opened my notebook and wrote on the first page, "No more pills." Just 3 words, but it felt like an oath. Not only no sleeping pills, but no more letting anyone decide when I get to be at ease. Day by day, I learned to live deliberately, cooking for myself, doing my own laundry, cleaning, choosing when to rest. No more schedules enforced by anyone else, no more reminders. I counted time not by pills or instructions, but by sunlight through the window, morning tea steam, and the wind moving the curtain. Sometimes I remembered those old nights but without pain. They were just a movie I'd seen, a role I once played. I no longer hated Dana. She had already received her life sentence, loneliness. As for me, I had peace small, but mine. One morning, as the light touched the table's edge, I wrote, "I slept for 18 years, but for the rest of my life, I will be awake." I closed the notebook, took a sip of tea, and watched the light pour over my hands, the same hands that once trembled, signing divorce papers, now resting steady on the table. I knew I would never go back to that house. I had nothing to prove to the past. I had moved out of it not just with my feet but with my soul. Peace doesn't come like a wave. It comes like a breeze light, real, and enough to carry off what you don't need. I lifted my head, smiled, and said softly to myself, "At last, Langston, you're living the true meaning of being clear-headed." Summer came early in North Carolina. Sunlight spread across brick roofs, spilled down narrow streets, and stirred the scent of pine and fresh asphalt. I sat by the window of my little apartment, watching neighbors bring out garden tools to tidy their yards, the feeling strangely real. No more shadows, no night pressing down, just time moving, steady and kind. One morning I saw Mr. Martin, the hardware store owner, up the block struggling with a metal door off its hinges. I went down to help without thinking. After half an hour, the door swung clean, no snag. "Mr." Martin smiled and shook my hand. "You've got a good touch, Langston. Heard you used to be a carpenter?" I nodded. "Yeah, years back." "Well, come paint my fence next week? I'll pay proper." I was about to refuse, then thought again. I had time, and these hands needed work. I said yes. From that small job, others followed. Mrs. Florence next door asked me to fix a broken chair. A young couple needed a cabinet door rehung. An old cafe asked for a fresh coat on the front door. Day by day, there was something to do. The pay wasn't much, sometimes just a few dozen dollars, but getting money for honest work eased me. Each time paint stuck to my fingers and wood scent soaked my clothes, I remembered my younger years when I believed simple diligence could hold a home together. Now I know, nothing is guaranteed, except the dignity you keep for yourself. I worked quietly. I didn't talk much or tell old stories. People only knew me as the older handyman in the small apartment who was always on time and soft-spoken. I liked it that way. I kept my hands busy so my heart could rest. In the morning, I arrived early with my toolbox, gloves, and a water bottle. Under the noon sun, I rested in the shade, ate a homemade sandwich, and listened to cicadas and kids laughing in the yard. Sometimes I felt like I was living inside a simple movie I'd never seen before, the kind of plain happiness I'd missed for 18 years. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. Work makes me feel useful. Every time I plane wood, roll paint, or swap a hinge, it's like I'm mending my own life. Neighbors gradually grew fond of me. Mrs. Florence often brought over apple pie. Mr. Martin invited me for a beer after work. A neighbor kid, a boy named Leo, called me Mr. Reed the Fixer. Every time he said it, I smiled. No, One here knows I used to be a man lulled to sleep for 18 years, and I don't feel any need for them to know. I don't need pity or respect. I just want to be treated like an ordinary human being. That's enough. One day, while I was repainting the gate for the coffee shop owner, he said, "These days folks only hire young workers, yet you still do it like new. Your skill is something time can't take away." I smiled and wiped my sweat. That's not true. Time takes plenty. But at least it gave me patience. That was the most honest thing I've ever said. After a day's work, I came back to my apartment, arms dead tired, clothes smelling of paint and sawdust. But when I walked in and the small room glowed warm under the yellow light, I felt at ease. No one waiting for me, no one controlling me. I had only myself, and now that's a privilege. At night, I took a warm shower, brewed tea, and opened the window. The night breeze slipped through the curtains, carrying a hint of jasmine from the balcony downstairs. I drank slowly, breathed deep. Sleep came naturally, no pills, no lying to myself. Just the fatigue of labor and a quiet mind. I slept soundly, like a man who knows that tomorrow morning there's still work to do, people to help, and a life to touch with real hands. One late afternoon, I lingered at a small cafe, the place where the owner once asked me to repaint the door. He set a cup of black coffee in front of me and said, "Mr. Reed, looking at you, I think. A person can lose a lot, but if he still knows how to use his hands, then he can still live." I nodded and said softly, "Not just live, but live right." That sentence followed me home that night. I sat at the table and opened my old notebook, the one I'd used to write my way out of sleeping pills and lies. On the last page I added, "Staying busy keeps people from feeling sorry for themselves." Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote a will. Not long, just over a page. I left my small savings, the old pickup, and this apartment to a fund supporting victims of emotional abuse and psychological control. I'd read about older folks, people lulled to sleep by other means, by words, by threats, by a look. I understand them. I used to be one of them. I want what I have left, however little, to become a small hand reaching out to someone lost in a long night like I once was. When I signed, I realized my hands no longer shook. The lines were straight, clear, decisive. I looked at that signature for a long moment, then chuckled. 18 years ago, I couldn't write a line without trembling. Now, it's different. I'm no longer the man of the pills. On weekends, I worked as usual. Trimmed a few branches, repainted a window frame, swapped hinge screws in an old house. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt, sunlight hit my weathered skin, but inside me was a gentle quiet I'd never had. People say happiness is having someone love you, I think. At my age, happiness is having enough strength to wipe your own sweat off your forehead. In the afternoon, I went home, made tea, sat by the window, and added one last line to the notebook. Dignity isn't given. It comes back when we dare to take it back. I closed the book and looked outside, the sky blazing orange, kids laughing in the yard, and a breeze nudging the plants on the stoop. I knew I had truly come back to life, not by magic, not by money or reputation, but by work, clarity, and the dignity of a man who finally learned how to love himself. Life is strange. When you stop waiting for anyone, the past comes knocking. One Tuesday evening, while I was repainting a chair for Mrs. Florence, the phone in my pocket buzzed. On the screen was the name Dana, the name I'd tried not to think about for months but still hadn't deleted. I stared at the screen until the ring ended. 3 minutes later, it rang again. Then a third time. I set the brush down, wiped my hands on a rag, and looked over at Mrs. Florence watering her plants. I didn't want to answer. There was nothing left to say. I let the phone ring until it went quiet. When I got home, a long text filled the screen. "Langston, I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want to say I lost myself trying to keep you. I regret it. I wish I could go back. I just want you to know I never stopped loving you. I read it all, then deleted it. Not out of hate, but because I didn't want to hear another story told by the person who turned me into an insomniac for 18 years. I'd lived long enough in the shadow of apologies. She called again that night, then the next day, then the day after. Each time I just looked at the screen, let it ring out, and go silent. I didn't need to scream or throw harsh words. Silence is my only answer now. A few months later, I heard from an old acquaintance in town that Dana had remarried, then soon divorced. I felt no glee, not even sadness. Inside me, the feeling was like a lake gone flat after a storm. No waves, no wind, just a clear surface reflecting myself. I sat by my apartment window, looking at the quiet street, listening to distant cars. I thought maybe she was also trying to survive in her own world, the way I once did. But the difference is this: I no longer need to listen or forgive to have peace. That night, I opened the notebook and wrote a simple line: "Peace is when you don't have to explain." I looked at the words resting on the page and felt lighter. My whole life I'd spent too much time explaining to others, to love, even to myself. Now I just want silence to let life speak for me. I began learning how to set boundaries. No one gets to step over my trust again, whether with sweet words or tears. I'm not shutting out the world, but I'm locking the paths into my heart that I once left open. Neighbors stayed friendly, sometimes inviting me to dinner. Once, Mrs. Florence said, "Mr. Reed, you're too lonely. You should meet someone, maybe." I smiled just a little. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm busy loving my life." She burst out laughing and patted my shoulder. "Good. Don't let anyone water down your tea again." I nodded. That line was shorter and truer than any philosophy I've ever read. On my small balcony, I planted a little cactus, a cheap one I picked up at the market. Every morning I watered it, set it in the sun, and watched it grow day by day. Not fast, not loud, just quietly a little taller. I realized it was like me after the damage, slow but resilient. One rainy day I covered it with a clear plastic bag and sat at the window, watching raindrops streak down the film. I remembered the old years' nights hearing rain at the window without knowing if I was really alive or just existing inside an artificial sleep. Now I can smell real rain and feel the damp on my skin, no pills, no lies. I learned to say no something I'd been afraid of all my life. No to people trying to walk into my life before I'm ready. No to pity. No to sweet words that make you forget yourself. Each time I said no, I felt a little more room for freedom open in my chest. I used to think yes kept the peace, that it was kind. Now I understand sometimes yes is the trap that ties you to what you don't want. No, even if it's cold, is the way out. At night I brewed tea, opened the window, and let the wind in instead of voices. The way it tapped the curtain made a familiar rhythm, like life whispering, "You're still here, Langston, still living, still clear-headed." I don't seek quiet out of fear anymore, but because it lets me hear myself. I started writing more regularly. Not a diary, just fragments of thought. Some people apologize only to ease themselves, not to change. The only thing I owe myself is peace. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's so I don't have to keep looking back. Each time I finished, I folded the paper and set it next to the little plant. I figured if one day I'm gone and someone reads these lines, they'll see that freedom doesn't come from payback, but from letting go. One morning I noticed the cactus had blossomed, a small, pale yellow flower, delicate, standing proud among the spines. I stared at it for a long time. I'd thought all my life that things full of spines only knew how to hurt. Turns out even the thorny can bloom when cared for right. I smiled, brewed a cup of tea, and threw the window wide open. Sunlight filled the room and warmed the wooden table. I poured and took the first sip. The tea was lightly bitter, then sweetened. Like life, the bitterness softens if you're willing to drink to the end. I looked outside and saw sparrows flit past, and heard laughter from the playground down the block. I said in my head, "Thank you, life, for still giving me a chance to start again." I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled. Sleep came as gently as breath. No pills, no lies. No one lulls me but my own calm. That night I slept deeper than any night before. And in that sleep I understood more clearly than ever. I never needed pills to sleep. I just needed to live true. I began writing on a clear morning when the first sunbeam touched the cover of a thick notebook I'd bought at the corner store. I sat by the window, the cactus still budding, steam rising from the teapot, and a blank page willing to listen. At the top I carefully wrote, "Journal of a man who once slept through life." I set down the first line, my hand unusually steady. "I'm Langston Reed, 60 years old." I thought I slept well, turns out I just slept through. From then on, every morning I spent an hour writing. Each page was a lesson, no preaching, no blame, just things I wish I'd known sooner, about soft control dressed as love, about blind trust paving the way for betrayal, about velvet schedules that bind. I wrote like a carpenter honing an old chisel, not rushed, not careless. When an edge wears down, before it gets sharp again, you have to feel its nicks. I wrote about the back door, the cologne, the pill rolling on the floor, about the night I left with trembling hands, about the courtroom with long benches that smelled of old varnish. Then I wrote about the balcony plant, the tea, and sleep without pills. With each page, it felt like I was raising the inner beams of a house under my own roof. I didn't keep the notebook to myself. I took a few chapters to the cafe on the corner, the one whose door I'd repainted, and read to some new friends. The owner leaned on the counter and said firmly, "You should share this wider, Langston. A lot of people are living the way you did." "Mrs." Florence held my hand, eyes wet. I saw myself in it, even though the story's different. Turns out people can be lulled by many things, not just pills. Messages started to come in. An elementary school teacher wrote, "I saw myself in scheduling my life by someone else's clock." A salt and pepper roofer said, "Thank you, pieces when you don't have to explain got me out of a toxic relationship." I read each line and remembered those nights I wrote in silence. I realized, truth, if it's gentle enough, lands where it's needed. Someone asked me bluntly, "Do you regret losing 18 years?" I smiled and gave the answer I'd practiced for a long time. "No, I just woke up late. Because if not for those years, I'd never know how precious real sleep is." I wrote a short chapter about forgiveness. I underlined one line. Forgiveness isn't agreement. It's letting go of the past so your other hand is free to hold the present. I don't know if Dana will ever read it, but I'm not writing for her. I'm writing for people like me, those who once traded peace for silence, who called control care, who told themselves everything would be fine. By day, I kept working around the neighborhood, fixing fences, painting doors, changing hinges. Toward evening, a few kids from the community center stopped by and asked if I could teach carpentry. I looked at those eyes still bright with the noon sun and said yes. They brought a few planks of pine, and I showed them how to measure, mark, guide the chisel with the grain, and run your hand over the wood to feel the bumps. I said, "Wood is like people. If you force it to your will, it'll crack. If you want it to follow, learn its grain first." The kids nodded along. A few of them were clumsy, their chisels cutting crooked lines, but I didn't scold them. I just said, "If it's crooked, fix it. What matters is, don't hide the mistake, hide it, and one day the whole table will collapse." After saying that, I suddenly laughed. I could hear something in my own words that sounded like I was talking to the man I used to be. Strangely, the more I taught, the more I felt useful. Again, the invisible weight in my chest, self-doubt slowly lifted. One day, a boy named Marcus threw his arms around me after he finished a bookshelf that finally stood straight. I patted his shoulder and felt a warmth in my heart I hadn't felt in years, They say only those who've been broken know how to hold others up. Maybe that's true. I also began to feel grateful for pain itself. I even wrote a chapter titled The Blessing of Wounds. I wrote, "Without wounds, we'd never know we needed healing. Without healing, we'd think we were invincible and blind to the pain we cause others. Pain taught me to wake up, to stay awake against sweet words, against golden routines, against every kind of love that comes wrapped in chains." One late afternoon, I opened an old cabinet and took out the wall clock that hadn't worked for years. I unscrewed the back, wiped the dust away, replaced a tiny spring, and reset the hands. The ticking came back hesitant at first, then steady, steady. I hung it on the white wall of my apartment. Under the lamplight, the second hand moved softly, like the footsteps of someone who's just learned how to walk through darkness. I sat down, touched the wooden frame, and smiled. "Good," I whispered to myself. "The real heartbeat is back." That night, I wrote late into the night. I gathered the loose chapters into a thin book and titled it A Manual for Waking After Betrayal. No jargon, no preaching, just 12 short lessons. Recognizing gentle control. Whose schedule are you living on? The art of silence, when it's a weapon, when it's a cage. Record keeping. Trading anger for evidence. Leaving with trembling hands. The courtroom. Letting truth do its work. Moving out of memory. Work and dignity. Boundaries. Learning to say no. Real forgiveness. Rewriting the husband. Sleeping for real. I printed a few copies at the local copy shop. Simple binding. With each one I handed out, I wrote a note. "If you're losing sleep, may this help you wake." One person gave me a handkerchief embroidered with the words, "Thank you." Another brought me a homemade loaf of bread. A young man wrote, "I decided to skip beer this month, bought a handsaw instead, and started building a bookshelf. Thank you, sir." I read that and laughed until tears blurred my eyes. One evening, as I was sanding down a scratched tabletop, the phone rang. It wasn't Dana, it was Frank Turner. "You doing all right?" he asked. "Heard you've been writing." "I'm no writer, Frank," I said, half joking. "I'm just rewriting the husband I used to be." He chuckled. "Call it whatever you want, but keep writing. Some truths, if we don't leave them in words, people will fall asleep to them again." I hung up and sat still for a long while. I realized not everyone gets the chance to wake up and then tell the story. I was lucky, and I wanted that luck to leave a trace. So maybe someday, someone else would open their eyes after a very long night. I went back to the desk and dipped my pen. Every line I write is a piece of wood. I'm rebuilding the house inside me, one without the smell of pills, without the creak of the back door, without anyone else's timetable. Only the honest ticking of a clock and the breath of a man who's learned life's hardest lesson. Never hand your sleep to someone else. Night fell. I closed the notebook and set it beside the cooled teapot. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, brushing against the window pane as if whispering my name. I blew out the candle. The room fell into a kind, gentle darkness. I climbed into bed and pulled up the thin blanket. No laughter, no scent of cologne, no ghosts in my mind. Only the steady ticking of the clock I had just repaired, sure, rhythmic, like a heart that had been given a new engine. I closed my eyes, and this time, like so many nights, lately, I truly slept not because of any pill, but because of the words I'd written each morning. Because in the end, writing isn't just telling a story. Writing is rebuilding yourself. One crisp autumn morning, I stopped by the pharmacy near the farmer's market, the one where I buy herbal tea every weekend. While waiting in line, my eyes caught a shelf behind the counter. Neatly arranged were the same small bottles of sleeping pills, white, familiar, with that faint blue label I once believed spelled peace. I stood there quietly, not out of fear, but because the past had brushed by like a shadow, turning back to nod goodbye. Part of me had once been imprisoned inside those tiny pills, inside a love mixed with sweetness and control, a routine that taught me to trust blindly, to sleep well, to stay calm on command. Now I know, real peace has no scent of medicine, no timer, no whispered reminders before swallowing. Peace doesn't need permission. It comes when you're awake enough to protect it yourself. I walked out of the store. A cool wind slipped under my collar. On the narrow street, yellow leaves dropped onto my shoulders, rolled a few times, then disappeared into the breeze. I'm no longer afraid of the night. For me, night is just the part of the day when the body rests, not a curtain hiding secrets. Every evening when the sun goes down, I light a small candle, pour a cup of mint tea, and write a few lines before bed. Never trade your peace just to please someone else. I paid dearly to learn that. Some people are so afraid of losing love that they live dimly in someone else's shadow. But love without truth is just sweet control. It soothes, it comforts, and it slowly steals pieces of your soul. I sit by the window, watching distant lights, quiet houses, familiar roads, the sound of cars fading. Inside me, no room left for anger, only a calm so soft it feels like the surface of a lake after the wind has passed. I remember what I once wrote in my notebook. Truth never arrives late. It only waits until we're awake enough to welcome it. And maybe, standing there in the pharmacy this morning, that was proof. I've welcomed the truth. I'm done running. I've traveled all the way from sleeping in lies to being awake in solitude. I sit down at my desk, open the thick notebook. Only a few pages left. Under the warm lamp, I write the final line. Langston Reed, the man who relearned how to sleep for real. I put the pen down and exhaled. It felt like closing a long chapter, one written with tears, sweat, and awakening. Outside, wind slipped through the cracks, stirring the ashes in an old tray, ashes from the letters Dana once sent. They lifted into the air, spinning through the light, then vanished. I watched them go, no longer hurt. Those years of deceit are now just dust of memory, too light to hold me down. I opened the window wide. The breeze carried the scent of dry leaves and wildflowers from the lower balcony. Before me stretched a pale sky, a sunrise that needed no promise, only honesty. The sun never swears it'll rise, yet it always does. People, on the other hand, when they lose honesty, every promise collapses. I took a sip of cold tea and glanced at the cactus by the window. It had bloomed again, just one small flower, not bright, not big, but enough to light up the corner of the room. I smiled, realizing that I too was blooming, quietly, in my own way. I no longer count the years I've lost. I count mornings when I wake in freedom. No one tells me what to drink, what to do, or who to trust. I live at my own pace, slow, real, awake. In the end, everyone pays a price for peace. Mine was 18 years of blindness and one deep betrayal. But I don't feel cheated. Because now, I have the one thing worth more than all the rest. A real night's sleep and a heart that needs no one's permission to rest. I close the notebook. The wind moves through the curtains, and dawn spills across the wall like water washing away the past. I look out, letting my thoughts drift with the morning light. Then I whisper, to myself and to anyone still trapped in a false dream, if there's anything worth waking up for, it's the truth. Because only truth can bring you back to yourself. I pour another cup of tea and watch the steam rise, a thin cloud between me and the quiet morning. Peace doesn't shout. It comes like this, with the ticking of a clock, the scent of wood, the wind through a cracked window, and the thought, today, I'm still here and I'm awake. Thank you truly for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you've made it here, maybe you too carry a scar, something that once kept you up at night or made you pretend to be at peace for far too long. I don't know where you are, maybe in a noisy city or a quiet room with just the sound of a ticking clock, but I believe. Everyone listening this far has had their own moment of awakening. So tell me, down in the comments, when did you realize it was time to wake up from what was hurting you? Who knows, your story might be the light someone else needs to find their way back to themselves. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next one. Because sometimes, just knowing someone out there is listening makes us all feel a little less alone.